Gavitt Games have finished up.
Talk about the Seton Hall Pirates.
I'm snoozing away on that one.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Matt's Madness. I'm Madi, your host. Today is an exciting one. This is going to be a really fun episode. I'm joined once again by Matt Majinski and special guest Rich Behan. Before we get into our first topic, how are you guys doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing.
I'm doing great. It's just that this is we've done this so many times that calling me a special guest doesn't seem to fit the bill. However, I think this is going to be a fun episode, an exciting episode. We haven't done something like this in a while, so I think this is going to be fun. And obviously, we're talking about topics that we know very well. So I think this is going to be a fun episode.
Yeah, no better person to get on a Big East episode than Rich. So I'm excited about that.
Thank you.
So yes, with that, it is going to be a Big East episode. The Gavitt Games have finished up, and the Big East surprisingly took them 6-2, which I'm sure we were all very excited about. And into our first topic, the Big Ten, entered the season with 8 teams either ranked or receiving votes. The Big East only had half as many, and the top 2 teams, Villanova and Connecticut, didn't even play in the games. Is this just a rough showing for the Big Ten? Maybe they're a bit overrated, or is it time for people to stop sleeping on the Big East? Rich, we'll start with you.
Well, I just think from my perspective, I think I was higher on the Big East to begin the season than a lot of people were. With that being said, however, I still think the Big Ten is the best college conference basketball. That's not English in the right words. However, what I'm trying to say is they're the best conference in college basketball. And I think over time they will prove that. However, from a Big East perspective, I think a lot of people slept on this conference. Even towards the bottom is now starting to, you can see the building blocks of the gap closing in the Big East. And I think a big thing of that was last night when you saw DePaul knock off a Rutgers team that, there was a bit of foul discrepancies, and you can argue that until you blew in the face. However, what you can say is DePaul has a new head coach in Tony Stubblefield. They have a lot of good talent on this team. It might be young, but they look like they're going to turn a corner. So now what you're doing is, if you want to measure how good a conference is, you can try and see from the top to the bottom how much of a discrepancy is it. And in terms of the Big East, I think that gap is closing a significant amount. And really, if you just look at the preseason rankings for the Big East, Seton Hall was 5th. Seton Hall just knocked off the number 5 team in the country in Michigan. St. John's, yes, they did take a loss in the Gavitt Games. However, I still think they're poised for good things this year. Butler is a very old team. And in college basketball, I think that's underrated just as a whole. So I think Butler's in for a very good season. And you saw Xavier last night take down Ohio State. So really, you're showing the world and you're showing the country that really the Big East is here to stay, and they're not going to fall down and just roll over to what you think are bigger conferences. However, they just might be on par.
Yeah, Rich, I've got to give it to you. I feel like the Big East certainly is turning some heads after that week's performance. But I just feel like the fact that the way that the Big Ten came into the season, I'm just more disappointed in how those teams fared. You look at this Ohio State team. I don't know if this is the same Ohio State team that we thought they might be this season. EJ Liddell seems like he's just kind of down there by himself down low. He's not getting enough help from his guards. In that opening game against Akron, that Ohio State starting backcourt didn't even make a field goal. So that's a thing that needs to be worked on for the Buckeyes. You look back at Michigan. I think, while Seton Hall played a very, very good game and was able to slow down Hunter Dickinson, he didn't even reach 20 points. That's very rare for a player of his caliber. I think it's more that Michigan is missing a Franz Wagner and Isaiah Livers. They definitely have a little bit less talent than they had last year. Not saying it's not a big win for the Pirates, but it's certainly not the same Wolverines team that we saw last season. And then you look at Illinois. This is an Illinois team that I think in the same respect is missing Ayo Dosunmu. Kofi Coburn is still a great player. But, you look at this Illinois team and again, they were without Coburn for that game. So that might have been part of an issue for that. They had to go a little bit smaller than they would have liked to. But I just still think that when you look at the way that Illinois was last year, in the same way that Michigan was last year, Marquette kind of caught a break in the early season, being able to get a win like that. So again, big wins for the Big East. I just feel like the Big Ten maybe is a few weeks away from being where they could be at. But right now, I think, yes, the Big Ten is overrated.
And it's one of those things where I don't want to discredit Shaka's first huge win at Marquette. However, you did just bring up the fact that they were without Kofi. So really, okay, if you want to take that game out of the kind of the viewpoint, that's fine. But really, kind of like you just said, Seton Hall, yes. They settled for shots on the outside, and they really didn't start working the ball inside until the second half. However, their defensive effort was probably one of the best defensive efforts I've seen a team give in quite some time. And they came prepared and they came ready to play. And I just think that when you talk about putting, like I said before, not only a conference in the Big Ten on notice that, hey, there's no more Power Five. Let's talk about 6 conferences, open it up, and really don't leave the Big East behind, because yes, they might have realigned and you thought that really they got worse, but now we're a few years into this, and now they're showing that really there was no drop off in talent.
And yeah, that does scare me, especially because, Villanova and Connecticut weren't in these Gavitt games. So you figure if they were in, who knows, maybe the Big East could have swept to 8-0, because obviously, some of those teams would have been playing different teams down the line. Of course, Purdue wasn't included on the Big Ten side. But I mean, Rich, back to the point, I feel like people, and I'll even point to me in this, I fell in love with the big men in the Big Ten this season. I mean, you got Coburn, obviously he didn't play in these games. You got TJD at Indiana, and you've got EJ Liddell and Hunter Dickinson. You've got 4 probably the top 10 big men in the entire country. And then you got Travion Williams on Purdue, who's now coming off the bench, but of course, Purdue didn't play in the games. But to my
point, with that, we are going to move on to our next topic.
Wow.
Because I can't believe I even let you start talking.
I'm really curious about what he was about to say, though. We'll talk about it later.
No,
we'll talk about it later.
You tried to introduce something new. This is next topic. Plenty of those Big East teams did pull off upsets, like we have. You guys were just talking about. At least based on point spreads and predictions experts, that's all we were hearing is upset. Which team do you think proved the most this week? Matt, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I kind of look at the first team that did it, and that's Marquette, because, and again, Illinois without their star, but they still have Trent Frazier, Andre Curbelo, who was very bad from the field, and they've got Jacob Grandison. I look at a Marquette team that last season was not real good. I mean, in the absence of Marcus Howard, first year without Marcus Howard, I don't know if Coach Woj was able to get what he needed to out of those Golden Eagles. In comes Shaka Smart, and he has totally transformed this Marquette team, and it's still only November. This has turned from an offensive, 3-point happy, shooting team that's going to put up 80 points a game into a team that shuts down a good offensive team in Illinois to 66 points, and then uses defense in the second half of the Ole Miss game last night to shut Ole Miss down to 72 points. That was an Ole Miss team that had 36 points at halftime. Now, Marquette used offense in the second half to kind of get past them as well, but it was still a defensive effort, because anytime in college basketball that you keep a team to a low 70s or anywhere in the 60s, that's a good defensive effort, especially against another Power 6 conference team. So when I look at Marquette, I look at Shaka Smart, the fact that he's been able to do this in mid-November, and the fact that he was able to knock off a top 10 team, and again, use defense. His players bought in, were able to steal that ball from Illinois in those final seconds and get that bucket to go. I don't think you would have seen that from Marquette last season. I don't think you would have seen that type of energy. I think they would have been fine fouling and maybe trying to send the game to overtime using their offense, but they've bought into the Shaka Smart system, that havoc defense, and that's why we see Marquette right now undefeated on the early season at 4-0.
Well, is defense the name of the game this year for the Big East? And is that something that they can hang their hat on? Because I'm going to talk about the Seton Hall Pirates and what I previously mentioned a few minutes ago, because their defensive effort was bar none. I've been watching Seton Hall basketball and following it for, I would say, about 5-6 years now religiously. And I can say with confidence that that is the best defensive effort that I've ever seen them give in 6 years. And it wasn't even close. I mean, they defended inside well. Yes, Dickinson still got his, but to your point before, Matt, he didn't have that humongous game that he's prototypical to have. They defended the 3-point well. Michigan didn't make a 3-pointer until the second half. So now you're sitting here, if you're Seton Hall, and you say, okay, yeah, on offense, we really didn't do well. We settled for shots on the outside. It was hard for us to work the ball inside at some points. However, you sit here and you say to yourself, okay, you come away with the 67-65 victory against Michigan, and now you have to go play Ohio State. So the schedule keeps on rolling for this Pirates team, and this seems like a game to me that you can hang your hat on and say, this was our trademark win of the year. However, it changed the rest of the season because of how well we played. We took that blueprint and were able to expand it over the rest of our games.
Yeah, and I can't discredit that either. I just feel like when you look at Marquette, when you look at Seton Hall, you know that Kevin Willard is going to get it going. You know that players are ready for this non-conference schedule. Year in, year out, Seton Hall schedule is tough and gets one big win. Now, this is probably the biggest win that Seton Hall has ever had since we've been following the Pirates, like you mentioned, for 5 or 6 seasons. But for Marquette's point, I don't think you're expecting a win like that because no one knew what to expect when Shaka Smart came into town. And now you see a Marquette team.
Well, I don't mean to cut you off there. However, the one thing I did expect is that he was going to be infinitely better than Steve Wojciechowski. I mean, let's be real here. I hate to be that guy. However, you're bringing in a coach that, yes, his last claim to fame, I'll say, was at VCU. Was he a little bit of a letdown at Texas? I think it depends on who you ask. However, I think the thing we can all agree on is that he is a loads better coach than Steve Wojciechowski. So from my perspective, when you look at something like this, Illinois without Kofi Coburn, I wasn't as shocked, to be honest with you, as you were. Yes, it's a statement win and an early program for a coach like Shaka Smart. However, he's been there, done that. And I think that on a game like this, in a Gavitt Games schedule like this, was not the most shocking one to me.
But see, Rich, to your point there, I could fire back and say the same thing about our Kevin Willard, because when you look at Kevin Willard, I don't think either of us can be surprised that the fact that Kevin Willard is able to deliver a non-conference win like that, because he has done it before and before. I think Shaka Smart, the fact that he's in a new conference with a brand new team that lost a lot of pieces, brought in some pieces as well. To me, that's a little bit more impressive, because we figured with this schedule that Seton Hall has, with Texas upcoming, with Ohio State, most likely Florida, if they get past the Buckeyes, if not Cal, Rutgers as well. It's a tough schedule. You knew that they were going to get probably 1 or 2 of those. They just so happened to get the biggest one. The fact that Marquette was able to deliver when I don't think anyone was looking at Marquette in this early season. I know that Marquette was picked down towards the bottom of the Big East preseason poll. Seton Hall was picked near the top of it. So to that, and Shaka Smart as well, coming off that loss at Texas in the first round to a 14 seed, I think the fact that he's been able to move past that and get this credit with another team is huge.
And with that, we're going to move on to our next topic. Finally, to start the season, it is looking like Colin Gillespie or Julian Champagne. I know it's Champagne. I always say his name wrong whenever I read it. Were the favorites to win Big East Player of the Year. But after that week, who knows what's going to happen with the Big East Player of the Year. Who's a dark horse that caught your eye during this past week of the Gavitt Games?
Maddie, shed pity. Julian shed pity.
I know it's Julian Champagne. But like sometimes I read it and I know it's Anyway, Rich, just
He's about to lead the Red Storm into glory with Posh Alexander. However, I am not going to give you any St. John's players in this segment. When Matt and I were talking about this last night, there was one name that popped into my head right away. And then there were two names while I was watching the DePaul Rutgers game that I was like, okay, I think we might have something here. But we'll get to that in just a second. The first person I want to start with is Daryl Morsell. He's the transfer from Maryland. He's in his grad year at Marquette. Shaka Smart was able to bring him into the program, and that was a tremendous get in the transfer portal for this program. Right now, he's averaging 23 points per game. He's averaging about 4 rebounds and about 3 assists. But really, when you talk about a head coach in a new program, you need players like Daryl Morsell to come in, buy in right away, and be a leader. And that's what he is. When I talked to him at Big East Media Day, that is the exact sentiment that he shared. He said, listen, we have to step into this locker room and we need to bring back the glory days of Marquette, because they've been there, obviously, with the likes of Dwayne Wade and Jimmy Butler. Marquette is a program that has been there. However, in the past few years, it's been a little stagnant. So Daryl Morsell is the guy that you need to come into that locker room and buy in. I'm going to give you not one, but 2 DePaul players, which is a wild thing to say. However, I was watching that game against Rutgers last night, and I said, okay, I think DePaul's starting a corner. I like Tony Stubblefield as a head coach, and I think these 2 guys right here are going to play a big part in this team going forward. The first one is Javon Freeman Liberty. I think this guy is a hooper. He's the leader of this team. He's averaging about 19 points, about 9 rebounds, and 6 assists early throughout the season here. He had 19 and 9 against the Scarlet Knights last night of Rutgers. However, there's another guy that I want to give you as well, and he is not known as yet in the Big East, and that is David Jones. He's a sophomore at DePaul. And he looks like he might be the young star of this program and something that the coaching staff can build upon. He's averaging a double-double right now early in the season, 20 points, 10 rebounds. He's shooting almost 50% from the field. And he had 22 and 5 last night against Rutgers. And listen, you can debate last night, was it more of a Rutgers loss than a DePaul win? And we can have that debate if you want. However, I think DePaul is going to start turning a corner here, and these 2 guys might be keys for them.
Rich, I mean, first off, you know damn well that no DePaul player is winning the Big East Player of the Year. I don't know how far down.
Excuse me. The question was sleepers. And you certainly seem to be sleeping, Mr. Majewski.
I'm snoozing away on that one. The Blue Demons, I'm sorry. I mean, we know what they can do with Tony Stubblefield might be a little bit better than what they did with Dave Lieto in the past. But let's be serious now. I will give you Daryl Morsell. I think that he's a real talented player out of Maryland. The only thing I have with him is that in 4 seasons with the Terrapins, he really didn't average more than 8 field goal attempts a game. In each of those seasons. And, you know, he was a guy that came in as a freshman with a lot of expectations, just never really turned it on. What I will say to that is he's the guy on this Marquette team at Maryland, obviously playing with a lot more talent. So, you know, I'll give you that. I'm looking at Paul Scruggs right now because I see a Xavier team where Paul Scruggs is the guy. He does a lot for this team. He's able to score the ball. He really gets the ball moving, and he rebounds as well. So if you're looking at stat lines, he's going to have all 3 of those major categories. And he had a big dunk over E.J. Liddell last night, which I think, you know, while that's not going to win you an award, that is going to turn some heads and start making you look at a certain player like that a little bit more because, you know, big plays, people like to see that. That's what catches people's attention. The other thing with Xavier is the fact that Zach Fremantle is still hurt with that foot injury. He's not expected to be back until the start of Big East play, but who knows if that's going to extend a little bit longer out. And if it does, I think you're going to see Paul Scruggs not necessarily padding his stats, but he's going to need to be the guy even more. And when Fremantle returns, he'll still need to be. I mean, Fremantle likely won't be at full strength until January, until we hit the new year. And by that time, Paul Scruggs might be so much immersed into the season that he's not going to let go of the pedal. And for that reason, again, I'm not predicting him to win the Player of the Year in this conference, but I think he's a guy to keep an eye on.
Paul Scruggs is one of those guys that, first of all, I feel like he's been in college for about 7 years. I don't know why, but I feel like he has just followed everything in the Big East for about 7 years. The one thing I will say to your point, though, is that people always seem to talk about Paul Scruggs early in the season as one of those players to watch. And then at the end of the season, he's not even in the conversation. So for me, Paul Scruggs is one of those guys where, yes, he shows flashes in the pan like he did last night. However, I've now taken the mindset with him where I'll believe it when I see it consistently throughout a whole season as to where we get to the end of the year and his name is still in those conversations.
And I'll hand it to you as well. I mean, Paul Scruggs, certainly against Ohio State, those numbers were good, 14 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists.
Oh, yeah.
Are they Big East Player of the Year worthy? Probably not. You'd probably have to drop something more like 27 and 4 or something around the lines of that. But just going off of that, I just feel like maybe this is his year. I mean, Xavier certainly has a lot of camaraderie on this team. They have a lot of guys coming back. Travis Steele knows what he has in this team. But last season, you didn't see it out of the Musketeers. So maybe Scruggs said, you know what, this offseason, this is my time to really show the Big East who I can be, what type of player I can be. I think we're seeing that early on out of Paul Scruggs. Again, that Ohio State game was good. I can't take Kent State and Niagara games into too big of consideration because, Paul Scruggs should be having bigger games against those talents. But then again, if you're picking a DePaul player, I think I'm fine.
No, excuse me. I didn't pick one DePaul player. I picked 2, baby. I'm riding high on him. I'm high on him. Listen, I tell you, save this, pin it. We'll
and
be back.
With that, we are going to wrap up another edition of Matt's Madness. Matt's Madness. Oh my gosh. Big East edition. And Big East basketball is close to all of our hearts. We love Big East basketball. It was an exciting week for Big East basketball, and it was fun to see. I loved seeing all the coaches cheer each other on and talk about it. I don't know. I think that was honestly one of the best parts. And we're excited for December. Once again, this has been another edition of Matt's Madness. I'm Madi Travisano. Thank you, Rich. We'll see you next time.